What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shape their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community. I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is one of the most prominent technology executives in Silicon Valley, Mary Baker. Mary was one of the first 30 employees at Intuit and rose to senior vice president as the company's revenue grew from $7 million a year to $700 million in her tenure. She went on to build BabyCenter, a website supporting mothers, which she sold to Johnson & Johnson for $10 million. And do you remember the wildly popular mobile game Diner Dash? Mary was the CEO of PlayFirst, where she successfully pivoted the company to mobile games like that one, which has been downloaded 500 million times. She brings her passion to every endeavor, including board roles, advising CEOs, and today, Corporate Competitor Podcast.
I'm armed with metrics. I'm ready to talk about my business. So I start having these one-on-ones with Bill, and he goes, how's it going? How are the kids? And the next week, come in, same thing. Yeah, I thought I was going to learn something here. How come you're not asking about my business results? He goes, oh, yeah, I get that from the CFO. What I really then care about is how's your life going, because that will affect your ability to be good in your role.
Mary, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Really happy to be here, Don.
This is all about understanding the competitive wiring of people who are able to achieve high-level things. And your competitive wiring had to start early. I saw you grew up in Eugene, Oregon, and you have 5 older siblings, being the youngest of 6. You got to imagine competitiveness, even for that last biscuit on the table, had to be a real thing.
For sure. It's, hey, don't forget me, I'm here kind of thing too, where there's so much chaos going on. You have to make sure that you stand out and get a seat at the table and don't get left behind.
Growing up there with your family, quite athletic. I know your father was actually an athlete as well. How did athletics play into your childhood and into some of that competitiveness for you?
Yeah, I think how do you make yourself stand out? Football wasn't so much of an option, but I could play basketball. I could play softball. We had a city free throw contest. I'm going to go win the free throw contest. I'm going to go win I can throw a softball, the farthest contest. And then among the 6 of us, I think we went to 3 different high schools, but I went to the same high school as my older sister had gone to. Her name was up on the leaderboard. She had thrown a javelin. So her name was sitting up there on the leaderboard at school, and she's 13 years older than me. And I just remember coming in there and going, that's my sister. That's who I'm going to go beat. Sports is a way to compete and a way to connect. The conversations that you can have just shooting hoops.
Without question, that connection is one of the greatest parts about athletics and what it allows us to do and grow as teams and as people. But you took that competitive spirit for you into the world of technology. You've held CEO and president roles in startups and Fortune 50 companies, but you refer to yourself as the accidental CEO. Can you share why you use that phrase?
Yeah, I grew up in, a relatively small town, and my dad was a high school teacher. I thought I'd go to Stanford and be a school teacher or something. I didn't really know about a lot of these other roles that you could go into. It really evolved by people I worked for believing in me and telling me I had potential and continuing to give me more opportunities. And in fact, one day, Bill Campbell, who was a famous football coach and also coached a lot of the senior executives or CEOs, famous CEOs in Silicon Valley and in technology. Bill at one point sat me down and he said, you can be a CEO one day, and I'm going to help put you in these different roles. We're going to get you there.
As we think of those who are listening right now and who might be in that beginning stage of their potential and their growth, there's one thing to just do the work to stand out. Were there other things you did? Were there ways that you put yourself into position to get to meet or learn from? Was there any other advice you would give to that person who's talented, but a lot of people are talented, but was able to become noticed? Going from talented to noticed, that's a leap at some stages.
Maybe there's a piece of being dumb enough to say, okay, I'll do that. When people come to you with, hey, we need this to happen. Okay, I don't know how to do it, but I'll go figure it out. I'll try, I'll learn, I'll experiment, I'll work at it. And in some ways, you can bring these things back to sports analogies where trying to get you to learn something new or go beyond where your current skills are and say, yep, okay, I can do that and I can make that happen. And so I think part of it was gaining this reputation of you need something done, Mary will do it.
That's a powerful reputation to have. If you can have one that others can say, you know what, if you give it to Mary, she'll give it everything. If it's meant to work, it's going to work for her.
Yeah, and I try to help younger folks who kind of really understand that, the flip side of it is if your boss comes to you and say, will you do this? You say no. Well, you don't get that many opportunities, right?
Right.
And those are when those real advances come in careers, is when you get that stretch assignment. That's where it's kind of like, oh yeah, ask Mary. She'll do it. She'll try anything.
You were the original Mikey.
There you go. Exactly.
It's the stretch assignment. I like that. I'm making a note of that. That's a great lesson for all of us. If you can go figure out, yeah, that's not in my space. It's not in my job description, but I'm not going to mention that. I'm just going to go give it a shot.
Yeah.
Love it. So I read a story where you recalled being a young CEO and you walked into a conference that you were attending. There were hundreds of people there in Silicon Valley, and you could count the number of women in the room on one hand.
Yep.
Now, you've noted the improvement that you've seen over the years, but there's always room for growth in this area of trying to recruit a more diverse population into our workspace. Our listeners are men and women who hold or aspire to hold executive positions. How can they recruit better? What can we learn from your experience that would make us better recruiters?
One of those skills is really trying to always put yourself in the other person's shoes. We know from research that even the language that's used in posting a job description can impact whether men or women apply for the job.
Right.
Because I'll hear people all the time saying, oh, well, women just aren't applying for my jobs. Well, okay, let's look at the language that you're using in the job description. Let's look at where you're posting. And then the next piece will be, well, we'll get women in and then they leave.
Right.
Those are some of those pieces. And in that process, of course, if a woman comes in and never interviews with a woman, well, then what's the conclusion? Well, women aren't in positions of authority. What opportunities are there going to be for me here if there's not even a woman in the interview process? I remember talking to this one woman who was trying to be recruited for something. And she goes, Mary, they took me to a men's club where women weren't invited as members. I'm sitting here, this guy's trying to recruit me to join his company, and we're in this walnut paneled, cigar smoking. There are no other women there. Even all the servers are men. This does not give you the good feelings that you're going to connect. So I think that there's a lot of these things where I'm sure he felt he was opening up his world to her, bringing her into this exclusive club. And for her, it was just a complete disconnect. There are cues that people pick up along the way, and being conscious of what those cues are that you're giving off and what that process will be matters a lot.
I love that you also give the benefit of the doubt to that gentleman. He wasn't being overtly hostile. He just, in a situation like this, he wasn't being empathetic. He wasn't thinking about the circumstances of the person sitting across the table from him.
And I think that that's also important of remembering that's not just a male-female thing. Women also need to be more empathetic. Just because I could make it at the top, how I was able to manage my life and arrange things doesn't mean that this young woman that I'm interviewing has the same situation. She may have different circumstances. And so again, me being curious about her, me trying to understand her. This is one of the great lessons from Bill, who was so good at managing and leading and developing this loyal following because you really felt like he understood you as an individual, different from the other 10 other guys, specifically on the executive team. And he understood each of them as individuals too.
He built very culture heavy organizations.
Yeah.
The culture that he engendered allowed you to feel so comfortable and to grow so much. What kind of advice are you giving people on that front?
Start early. A lot of the startup entrepreneurs that I work with, I'll say, even just put a few notes down on the piece of paper, bullet points. Know what kind of a company you're wanting to build, because that also helps you know the types of people that you want to bring on board too.
In the introduction, I mentioned that you were hired as a project manager at this little 30-person company at the time called Intuit. As the company grew, Bill, who was the CEO at the time, taught you some tremendous business lessons, leadership lessons. So tell me how he set you and your teammates up for success. What are some things you can share?
I was so excited when Bill was brought in to be CEO. He had this reputation of being this fabulous leader, fabulous CEO, had been a football coach at Columbia, and then had worked for John Scully at Pepsi, then had run sales at Apple and been CEO of Claris when it got spin out, and was known within Silicon Valley as the coach because, of course, that football coaching history, but also because he was brought in to coach founders. Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, the Google guys. He knows how to lead, knows how to manage. So I started having these one-on-ones with Bill, and he goes, "How's it going? How you doing? How are the kids? How's your husband?" The next week, come in. "How's it going? How you doing?" Kind of the same thing. After a while, I'm like, yeah, I thought I was going to learn something here. I'm armed with metrics. I'm ready to talk about my business. How come you're not asking about my business results? He goes, "Oh, yeah, I get that from the CFO. We got this guy over here who gives me that information. And I know if something's going wrong, you'll tell me. What I really then care about is how you are doing. I want to know, how's your life going? Because that will affect your ability to be good in your role.
Wow.
If your kids are struggling, if you're not getting enough exercise, if you're not getting enough sleep, that's going to affect your ability to do your job. I can look at the data without you here, Mary. I can only understand that piece when you're in the room with me."
That is a gift. And you're thinking the whole time, these one-on-ones aren't anywhere near as cool as I thought they were going to be. And the truth is, you might have just learned the greatest lesson of all. Get to the heart.
Yeah, I was looking for some matrix and check boxes and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, it's the heart. Absolutely. And by really knowing that Bill had your back, that also made you willing to take a risk, to try something new, because you were always confident that he knows you're working hard at it. He'll give you an opportunity, and you weren't going to be kicked out of the game if you made a mistake or did something wrong. He'd tell you. He'd come in the morning, he's like, "What the F have you done today, Baker?" "Oh, okay. I'm about to learn something."
So I'm going to tell you, I know we're on a podcast, but I'm getting the blessing of getting a chance to look at you in this Zoom. And I saw your eyes get a little misty there for a second.
Yeah.
It's pretty powerful that he had that kind of impact on you.
Bill passed away a few years ago, and it's just a real loss. But he was so good at touching so many people and trying to help others learn, and especially women. Outside of me, he certainly elevated a number of women within Intuit, but outside had a group of women entrepreneurs who he was also coaching and mentoring and coaching football at the local high school. John Donahoe, the CEO at Nike, his son had played for Bill on the local high school team. He'd say, you have all these high school boys running all over the place. It's chaos. As soon as coach steps on the field, they gather and they're down on a knee. Just this kind of ability to command. As CEO of a big company, coaching after school football. And then when his daughter was at the high school, he created a Powder Puff football league because he wanted to be able to coach his daughter too, and was quite good at setting the tone for the rest of his team. And from that, wanting us to set the tone going down, that we all have lives too. He famously at one point said, I'm not going to call any meetings before 10 a.m. or anything after 5 p.m. because I want the moms and the dads to be able to drop their kids off at school, be able to be home for dinner. Now, Bill, of course, had oftentimes two breakfast meetings, 6 a.m. breakfast meeting, then take his daughter to school and then come into the office. But, really setting that expectation and role modeling, being involved with your kids' lives.
So how did you take that role modeling and model it into your own career, especially as a leader, as a CEO?
This is an especially helpful thing for women because it can be kind of tough. On one hand, people often feel like, well, I should hide the fact that I'm going to leave for an hour to go to a parent teacher conference, or I should maybe not share that I got to leave because my kid's sick and I want to get home and take care of him. Keep working from home, but at least be home. I remember hosting a company summer picnic at my house. And one of the women, a couple layers down on the team, came up, goes, oh, your life is just perfect, Mary. This is just amazing. And I'm like, have I been doing a bad job? And it really helped me realize, especially for younger women, the more I can be authentic with the challenges I'm having as a mom, the reality of being a CEO while raising 3 kids and chickens and dogs and cats and all the menagerie that comes with it all, and really started sharing more of those stories, which again, I've had so many of the young women that I've had the opportunity to work with be able to come back and tell me just what a real difference that made. Seeing that it's not perfect, it's not always pretty, it's certainly not easy, but the benefits are worth it.
It's funny, the more CEOs I've talked to, especially through this podcast, one of the great challenges is that relatability factor. How do you feel like you can connect with me? Because sometimes it looks like the gap between us and some of those we work with is so far. That is one of the beauties of sports, is that sports is kind of a common denominator. You have no idea when you're sitting there at that Stanford game that the person next to you could be an electrical engineer solving problems in Mars, and the next one could be someone who works in sanitation. But it doesn't matter. For that period, you're cheering for Stanford. I love that about sports. Back to Bill, there was a wonderful book written about him called $1 Trillion Coach. It's some amazing lessons in there. It's really well spelled out in that book how he helped coach people like you, people like Jobs, some of the great ones in Silicon Valley. Couple of big takeaways for you that you might be able to recall as you think about lessons from him?
Yeah, he was great at, we'd go visit a site and he'd start in the mailroom or he'd start with the guys in the warehouse. He would spend more time physically present with the people at junior levels than spending all his time just behind some closed doors with the senior executives. And what that gave him was these people who would call him up and say, you should know something's going on here. And people didn't abuse it. You never abused the access to Bill. You were always very careful about when you called for his attention. It was just the ability to garner respect while also taking everybody in the shipping department out for beers and playing pool at the end of the day. He gained your respect, he gained your trust, and you knew he wanted to hear from you if there was something that he needed to know. That I definitely took to heart, really making sure you're accessible, because one of the worst things that can happen in an organization is when people try to hide things from the CEO. That's when stuff goes wrong.
Amen.
Keeping those channels of communication open is really key.
Wow, I love that. We had Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta, a few weeks ago, and one of the things he talked about is like governing his calendar to make sure that a large portion of it was outside of the executive suite. He wanted to be in airport lounges and these places where employees were, because too often as a CEO, you could find yourself almost trapped in your own castle if you don't make an intentional effort to get out. So as I was learning about your background, I'm going to sound now like the young woman that was standing at your house talking about how perfect things were, because it does look, when I'm studying you a little bit, that everything you touch seemed to turn to gold. When you're CEO at PlayFirst, you successfully pivoted the business model to mobile games and created Diner Dash, which is 500 million downloads now. Crazy. How would you encourage our listeners in this day and age where people are having to look at their organizations and think about pivots? Those who are able to pivot most adeptly are probably going to be those who survive the best. What can you teach us about pivot and things that you learned while trying to navigate a directional shift for an organization?
Great question. Here in Silicon Valley, things move fast, and always sitting back and thinking about how are my competitors trying to beat me? What might their playbook be? Like, what are they trying to do? What are the new companies coming up? How are they trying to get at this? If I were going to do a startup today and try to disrupt myself, what would I do? How would I go about doing that? Where are the areas that I am exposed? What are my weaknesses such that, a startup or a competitor would be trying to hit those spots? And then where are my strengths? I can leverage those to get some advantage and increase my market share.
A lot of intellectual scouting there, because you're thinking about current threats, potential future threats. Well, there's a lot of scouting there.
The other piece of it was really understanding the customer and listening to. I am a huge fan of actually going out and directly talking. The numbers are good to give you some high level, but you have to get it in your heart. You have to get the competitor in your heart, the competition, the customer in your heart, so you can really understand as you're seeing where these disruptive moments come, how you can shape it to your advantage.
Would you say the ability to adapt to change is as much about understanding weaknesses or strengths?
There's a bit of both, because if you don't cover your blind side, you're going to get sacked all day long. There's probably always a danger of thinking that your strengths are stronger than they are. Because if you're too strong, if you're unbeatable, you probably aren't going to have a lot of people coming after you. It's when they see your weaknesses. So I think there's that humility and honesty, curiosity about yourself and your own weaknesses personally and with the company or the product that can probably give you the most actionable steps that you can take. I always found it more productive to really understand what are those things that we could do better at. But you do need to reflect where your strengths are. The reality is people like to do things that they're good at. It's so much more fun to do something that you're good at. So the whole corollary also is you're managing people. Understand, here's what Don is really good at. Let me give him some things that allow him to shine in this area. And I'll coach him in some of these other things along the way. But if I keep wanting Don to fit in the same mold that, Mary fits in, that may just be the wrong mold. And I need to respect where Don's skills are, where his strengths are different from where Mary's skills are, and really let them fire up on all cylinders by letting loose on those areas. There's always going to be things to coach on, but you can't put everybody in the same box.
I love it.
Whether that's personally or at the company, really being true to understanding both those strengths is also important.
I love the line that you had about being your own consultant. You have to be constantly evaluating all those things, because at some places there will just be instinct that's going to have to kick in, but you have to have a sense of things in order for instinct to actually be really worthwhile.
Yep.
I had a chance to study, learn a little bit about your athletic history, specifically in high school, basketball, softball, soccer. You became so good at track throwing events. Your sister was a record holder. By the way, did you pass her?
Yes, I did.
That's the news I wanted right there. But Georgetown recruited you, but you chose to go to Stanford and not to be on an athletic team other than to get involved in intramurals. Tell me a story, if you would, about athletics for you, a competitive moment when there was maybe something that happened for you, a lesson learned that you might still reflect on today.
Yeah, my best throwing event was actually shot put, but this realization of I can't change how tall I am. I can't change how long my arms are, how long my legs are, but I can work hard.
Yeah.
I think also maybe just this general piece of asking and you can learn, even though you may be competitors at some level, you're also human beings. You're also maybe both interested in a sport in this case or in a topic or something. And maybe there's some natural ability to share. I certainly know as my career progressed in Silicon Valley, I think Silicon Valley's been very famous for the frenemy notion between companies, that there's just so many areas where you do have to collaborate. And the Valley, at least at one point, was very small. You might be competing with somebody one day, but collaborating with them on something another day. And you didn't want to make enemies. You wanted to make respectful competitors, healthy competition. And there was a lot of collaboration, a lot of sharing. And sometimes these days, I wish we could get back to that more in society.
More of that. Isn't that the truth? All right. So I have to ask you, though, from an athletic standpoint,
Yeah.
you are going to be the first ever guest we've had that was an inner tube water polo player. This was an intramural event at Stanford. Give me a lesson from inner tube water polo.
Regular water polo is hard, man. How do those guys do that? All that work that's going on under the surface all the time. It's a lot easier with an inner tube. Maybe the lesson is I was certainly never going to be good at water polo. Maybe sometimes we all need a little inner tube to help us get through and be successful at something that we're trying to do.
There's the lesson right there. I like it. The word teams is often overused in the corporate world. We're busy referring to the folks that we work with as our team, when the truth is you've been on teams. You've helped build teams. You've worked with Bill, who talked about teams. But often what we really have is a collection of people who just happen to have the same business card. They're not really a team. If you were trying to help a young leader today to take a group of independent actors and build them into something that is headed in that direction together, what would be a couple of coaching lessons, ideas that you would give them to try to help pull a group together and make them a team?
Yeah, despite Bill being a football coach and me having primarily focused on track, I always find basketball as the most easily graspable concept, especially for somebody who hasn't played sports. I like to think of like on a basketball team, you can't win if all you really have are 5, 6 foot point guards.
Right.
You also can't win if all you got is 5, 7, 4, whatever centers. You got to bring together a combination of people with different skills to be able to win the game. You got to have competency and excellence at different skills. And those people need to respect and understand that this other person brings this to the table. I bring that to the table. We all have our roles. We all have our expertise, and respect each other's expertise and know that while I've got to cover my lane, I'm on a team. If Don's over here and needs help with something, for us to win, I'm going to go take some time and help Don too. Because sometimes I'm going to be struggling and maybe I'll need Don's help. So having that sense of not just being heads down, so focused on what I got to do and my little piece of it, that I forget to be heads up and keep my eye on the court and know what's going on with my teammates to know where I can go help. I think is one of the most important things that both gets people thinking above their own role on a strategic level, on a cross-functional level, maybe on a cross-geography business. Those people you're bringing further to the top are the ones who've really demonstrated that ability to lift their heads up, us be heads down and do their job. You're not going to win a game if only one guy is scoring points.
Right.
Everybody's got to score some points. Everybody's got to bring their game to the table or block some shots or get some rebounds. Everybody contributes.
I love it. And every once in a while, it doesn't hurt to have an inner tube.
Exactly.
Hey, Mary, so grateful. I've learned so much. What a life you've lived. to have the chance to have not just experienced and grown some of the companies you've grown, but to have done it in the company of some of the people you've done it with. I appreciate the time today, the lessons. I've scribbled all kinds of notes here, but more than anything today, I thank you for being a corporate competitor.
Thank you, Don. It's been really great to be here with you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Wow, what a storied career Mary had. What an amazing collection of experiences that led her to some incredible opportunities, but also put her in the presence of those that she was so open to learn from. I loved that when she was talking about her early career growth, that pathway that she was on to find success. She said that she was always, quote, dumb enough to say, I'll do that. I love the way she talked about gaining a reputation as always being willing to accept that stretch assignment. And if you gain that reputation over time, you will get more grace, you will get more opportunity, and you will find yourself in the boardroom. Pretty impressive. When she talked about once she grew as a leader, she had to learn many lessons about adding to her team. And really important, she said, to find and show empathy toward those that you're growing with, learn their interests, be curious, don't assume things about others just because of where they've come from, what gender or race they might be. Actually look and say, what can I learn about you before trying to figure out how we can best work together? And then finally, she talked about as a team, how can you keep your head up? Look at your teammates, be not just attentive to what you have to do, but be looking for how you can make others better because you're going to need them to do the same. What powerful lessons. What a great day to be a corporate competitor. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir.
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.